As global tensions rise and the world shifts toward a new power balance, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping unveil a deeper Russia-China alliance focused on trade, energy, and challenging Western influence, signaling a dramatic push toward a multipolar world order that could reshape global politics, economics, and international relations for years ahead. The growing partnership between China and Russia is once again drawing global attention as Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin held major talks during a high-level summit focused on trade, energy, diplomacy, and the future of the global order. At a time when the world is facing rising geopolitical tensions, economic uncertainty, wars, and growing divisions between global powers, the meeting between the two leaders carried enormous significance. Both governments used the summit to present a united front and reinforce what they describe as a long-term strategic partnership built on trust, cooperation, and shared interests. During the official meeting, Xi Jinping described the relationship between Beijing and Moscow as stronger than ever before. Xi Jinping said, "Today, our relations have reached an unprecedented level, serving as a model of a truly comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation." The Chinese president emphasized that the partnership did not emerge overnight. According to him, the relationship has grown gradually over many years through political coordination, economic cooperation, and mutual strategic trust. Xi also spoke about the growing instability in global politics. He warned that the international system is currently facing division, confrontation, and increasing uncertainty. However, he insisted that despite these tensions, most countries still seek peace, development, and cooperation rather than conflict. Xi Jinping said, "Yet the pursuit of peace, the development and cooperation remains the aspiration of the people and the trend of the times." The comments reflected China's broader diplomatic message in recent years, where Beijing has increasingly positioned itself as a supporter of multipolarity and economic cooperation, while criticizing what it sees as excessive Western dominance in international affairs. Xi Jinping stressed that both China and Russia, as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and major global powers, have a responsibility to shape the future international system together. Xi Jinping said China and Russia must work together to build a more just, equitable, and reasonable global governance system for all. The atmosphere during the meeting also highlighted the unusually close personal relationship between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. The Russian president repeatedly referred to Xi as a close and trusted friend, while praising the level of communication between both sides. Vladimir Putin said, "President Xi Jinping, you are my very dear, truly esteemed and most valued personal friend." Putin even referenced a traditional Chinese proverb to underline the closeness between the two nations, saying that time apart feels much longer when close friends are separated. The Russian president also reflected on the history of modern Russia-China relations. He spoke about the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation signed between the two countries 25 years ago, describing it as a foundation that allowed bilateral cooperation to expand into nearly every major strategic sector. According to Putin, that long-term framework has now developed into one of the strongest partnerships in global politics today. The Russian delegation that accompanied Putin included senior ministers, business leaders, and representatives from educational and public organizations. Their presence demonstrated the broad scope of cooperation now linking the two countries across multiple sectors. Economic cooperation was one of the central themes of the summit. Despite sanctions, global instability, and increasing geopolitical pressure from the West, trade between China and Russia has continued growing rapidly over recent years. Putin highlighted the scale of that growth while discussing bilateral trade figures between Moscow and Beijing. According to the Russian president, trade turnover between the two nations has increased more than 30 times over the past quarter annually and has remained above the $200 billion mark for several consecutive years. Energy cooperation remains one of the most important pillars of the relationship. Following Western sanctions and deteriorating relations with Europe, Russia has increasingly shifted its energy exports toward Asian markets, especially China. Beijing, meanwhile, continues seeking stable long-term supplies of oil, gas, and other strategic resources to support its massive industrial economy. Vladimir Putin said, "Russia continues to maintain its role as a reliable supplier of resources and China as a responsible consumer of them." The energy partnership between both countries has expanded significantly in recent years, with large-scale cooperation involving pipelines, oil exports, natural gas agreements, and electricity projects. The Middle East crisis and ongoing instability in global energy markets also shaped discussions during the summit. Rising tensions in the Gulf region and concerns surrounding shipping routes have increased fears of disruptions to global fuel supplies. In that environment, both China and Russia presented their cooperation as an important stabilizing factor for international energy security. Beyond energy, the leaders also discussed expanding cooperation in agriculture, transportation, manufacturing, technology, education, and cultural exchange programs. Putin praised the rapid growth of humanitarian cooperation between both countries. He pointed specifically to expanding educational partnerships and cross-cultural programs designed to deepen people-to-people connections. The Russian president also highlighted the importance of visa-free travel arrangements between Chinese and Russian citizens. According to him, the policy has strengthened tourism, business activity, and academic exchange between the two countries. The summit was not only about economics, it also carried major geopolitical significance. Both leaders repeatedly spoke about the emergence of a multipolar world order, a phrase frequently used by Moscow and Beijing to describe a future international system where power is distributed among multiple major countries rather than dominated by a single superpower. Over the last several years, both governments have increased coordination inside major international organizations, including BRICS, the G20, the United Nations, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Putin described cooperation between Moscow and Beijing as one of the key stabilizing forces in global politics today. He also praised the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as an important example of regional integration and equal cooperation between nations across Eurasia. According to Putin, the organization has become a successful platform for resolving regional issues while promoting economic and political coordination among its members. The Russian leader also confirmed his intention to attend the upcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit scheduled to take place in Shenzhen later this year. The timing of the summit attracted additional global attention because it came during a period of rising competition between major global powers. Analysts across several countries viewed the meeting as a clear signal that China and Russia are determined to deepen their partnership despite growing pressure from Western governments. The summit also highlighted how dramatically global geopolitics has changed in recent years. Russia's relationship with the West has deteriorated sharply following the Ukraine conflict and the imposition of large-scale sanctions by the United States and European allies. As a result, Moscow has increasingly turned toward China for economic support, diplomatic coordination, and access to alternative markets. China, meanwhile, has attempted to maintain a careful balance internationally. Beijing has continued strengthening ties with Moscow, while also presenting itself globally as a supporter of stability, trade, and dialogue. Through the summit, both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin criticized what they described as unilateralism, political pressure, and hegemonic behavior in global affairs. Although the United States was not directly mentioned in several parts of the discussions, the political message behind many of the comments was widely understood. Xi Jinping warned that the world is currently experiencing growing division and confrontation. Xi Jinping said, "We are witnessing division, tension, and hegemony." At the same time, both leaders attempted to portray their partnership as defensive and stabilizing rather than confrontational. Putin argued that Russia and China support sovereign equality, cultural diversity, and independent development for all countries, regardless of their size or political system. Vladimir Putin said, "We remain fully committed to building a much more just, equitable, and democratic world order." The summit also reflected the increasingly close strategic coordination between both governors in international diplomacy. Russia and China have frequently aligned positions on major global issues at the United Nations Security Council and other international forums. Both countries have opposed what they see as foreign interference in domestic affairs and have repeatedly criticized sanctions policies imposed outside the framework of the United Nations. At the same time, both governments continue working to strengthen alternative financial and economic structures aimed at reducing dependence on Western systems. The optics of the summit were carefully managed to project unity, stability, and long-term confidence. Official ceremonies, state honors, and public statements repeatedly emphasized friendship, strategic trust, and historical continuity between Moscow and Beijing, observers noted that both leaders appeared determined to present their partnership not as a temporary arrangement, but as a long-term geopolitical alignment with global implications. Behind the diplomatic lay, so in Guj, however, practical realities continue driving the relationship. Russia increasingly depends on Chinese markets, investment in industrial cooperation to offset economic pressure from Western sanctions. China, meanwhile, benefits from stable Russian energy supplies, expanded access across Eurasian trade routes, and strategic coordination against Western influence. That convergence of interests has accelerated cooperation in multiple sectors, including energy, transportation, infrastructure, technology, and defense coordination. The leaders repeatedly framed this cooperation as mutually beneficial and rooted in shared respect for sovereignty and national independence. As the summit concluded, both sides signaled that cooperation between Moscow and Beijing would continue expanding in the years ahead. Putin formally invited Xi Jinping to visit Russia next year, reinforcing the pattern of regular high-level meetings between both leaders. The summit ultimately served as more than just a bilateral diplomatic meeting. It represented a broader statement about how China and Russia view the future of global politics, one where multiple powers compete for influence and where emerging economies seek a greater role in shaping international institutions. Whether that vision becomes reality remains uncertain. Much will depend on future developments involving the global economy, conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, relations between China and the United States, and the ability of emerging powers to challenge existing global structures. But one thing became clear during the summit: both Beijing and Moscow are determined to move forward together. And as geopolitical tensions continue reshaping the international landscape, the partnership between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin is likely to remain one of the most important and closely watched relationships in the world.